Hello, my name's Stuart. I'm the curator of the Cromwell Museum in Huntingdon. Great pleasure to be with you here again today. Again, operating from home, I'm afraid, as we're still in lockdown in England at the moment, at least for another week or so. This is an unusual Cromwellian conversation today because I haven't got a specific subject matter I'm going to talk to you about. Instead, I'm going to pick up some of the questions that you've asked us. So we've done now 16 different Cromwellian Conversations videos, number of other sort of videos as well about aspects of 17th century history. And quite a few people have posted questions on our YouTube channel, which we've tried to answer generally speaking, but thought it'd be quite interesting to sort of also pick some of them up as part of a video and talk about them today so that we can share some of those bits of knowledge out a little bit more widely. First question I've got is going back to video number 4. Which was the indie discussion did with Paul Lay about the subject as Cromwell as Lord Protector. And Europhile 26 posted a question after the video which basically asked about the fact that there's lots of Commonwealths in the United States. There are at least 4 American states refer to themselves as Commonwealths. US historians quite often talk about the period in the mid-17th century, the period of the English Republic, as being the English Commonwealth. And he asked about the very, I suppose, important question, what's the difference between a Commonwealth and the Protectorate? Well, in terms of history, sometimes these two terms are used sort of interchangeably by historians, and certainly in things like popular histories and journalists and so on. But there is a distinct difference. We tend to refer to the period after the trial and execution of Charles I and the ending of the monarchy in this country, when Parliament takes power, the sort of the rump Parliament is running the country. That's the period of the Commonwealth. So that's the Commonwealth is the sort of full-blown republic that's run by Parliament. When Parliament is dismissed in April 1653, and then we have the bare bones Parliament, the nominated Assembly. Sure, at the end of that period, then they sort of disperse themselves, and as discussed in that particular video. And we have a period then that we set up underneath the Protectorate when Cromwell becomes Lord Protector. And you have Parliament still called on a regular basis, but Cromwell is the person running the show. So from December 1653 up until Cromwell's death, and certainly the period followed thereafter, with Richard in sort of running the show as well, that's the period we tend to refer to as the Protectorate. So the Commonwealth is the period when you've got Parliament who's running the show, and the Protectorate is the period when basically one or other of the Cromwells is head of state at that point. So the short answer is, in terms of dates, that the Commonwealth is between 1649 and 1653, and that the Protectorate is between 1653 and 1659. Then there's a sort of strange period afterwards before the Restoration in 1660, and that's a whole other argument at that point. There are other period kind of terms that you also sometimes hear used to describe this period as well. Some people call it the English Republic as a kind of blanket term to cover the whole period. A lot of very traditional textbooks and a lot of pro-royalists will use the term the interregnum. The interregnum, of course, implies that there is just simply an aberration, a break between sort of two different monarchs, between Charles I and Charles II. So there's lots of different terms used for that period, but that's the difference between Commonwealth and Protectorate. As for video number 6 that we did, Jazzman 1982 did sort of tell us that there was a follow-up to the TV series The Devil's Whore, which was called New Worlds, which was a sort of sequel series largely set in colonial America. I have to say I didn't really remember the series being on at the time, and I don't think very much of it. I think I only watched 1 or 2 episodes, and I don't think it was as well written as the first one. However, sort of historically inaccurate the first series was. We also had a question about what did I think to 2 particular films that I didn't feature in the video we did on the English Civil War on film. One was the film The Admiral, which came out in 2015, and the other was the more recent film called Fanny Lie Delivered, which, if it had been out at the time when I did that video, I would have covered because it's very definitely set during the period of the Civil War. The Admiral was released in 2015. I didn't cover it in the video that I did before because I didn't really think it fitted to our period. It's set slightly later. It's really sort of 1660s and later. And it's actually a Dutch film. The original title was Michel de Ruyter, which is the Admiral, who is the central character to the film, but obviously retitled for an English-speaking market as the Admiral. So de Michel de Ruyter tells the story of the eponymous admiral, Admiral de Ruyter, who was sort of kind of Dutch naval genius, leading campaigns, particularly against the English during the Anglo-Dutch Wars of the mid-17th century. As I say, it's slightly out of our period, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about it. A lot of it is about the sort of internal politics of Holland at the time, which is really quite interesting, and the kind of deposition and actual murder of the Dutch head of state. It involves English politics as well in terms of the marriage between the future William III and Queen Mary. Charles Dance pops up as a sort of cameo as Charles II in it. Kind of chewing the scenery quite a lot, and I have to say, not entirely well cast, I don't think. I think he's got the height of Charles II, but he's actually a little bit old for Charles, who died in his sort of early mid-50s. Battle scenes are great fun, obviously very spectacular naval battles of the period, so it's very entertaining and well worth a watch. So Fanny and I Delivered came out just this year, in 2020. I think it was actually made last year, but for various reasons, it's largely been released. Obviously, with the coronavirus epidemic, it's been largely most people have been able to see it either by download or on video, by DVD and Blu-ray and so on. It's a kind of psychological drama set during the 1650s, so it's set during the kind of Commonwealth Protectorate period, and stars Charles Dance and Maxine Peake as a sort of Puritan couple who live in a remote farmstead somewhere in England. And there are basically a young couple turn up on the doorstep who apparently have been robbed and stripped naked of all their clothes. And it goes into a whole psychological drama and much deeper. And I don't want to spoil the sort of plot twists and so on from the film if you want to watch it. So I was asked the question, what do I think of this particular film? It's what I call as a bit of a curate's egg. There's some really good stuff in it. The cast are excellent inside the film. Some of the period detail is very good. A lot of the language is very earthy. Talks about and uses religious sects of the period, particularly the Ranters. First time I've ever seen the Ranters being used in a film or television program. And so in that sense, it's very good. It's quite interesting. It does, I have to say, sort of trot out a lot of kind of traditional stereotypes that's not always very accurate. So we get the image of the black-clad Puritan as usual. Sort of, the male cast all seem to have short hair, which for 17th century men wouldn't be the case. So it's things like that you can kind of pick up on. As a film as a whole, I thought it was ever so slightly long. It needed sort of a bit of sort of trimming, about 20 minutes, half an hour. And the soundtrack to the film, which is actually also kind of composed by the director, I think it was quite a personal project for him, is a bit intrusive, I have to say. So it's a curious film. It's a curious egg of the film, but worth looking out for if you haven't seen it and are interested in this particular period in history. Eurofile 26 also asked us a question on our Causes of the Civil War video, so that was number 7, asking about American connections to the causes of the Civil War. And it's certainly true that a lot of the people who were involved in the Civil War period actually gone over to the States, had gone over to the American colonies as they were then. For instance, Hugh Peter, who was kind of Cromwell's favoured preacher, had been at Harvard, for example, as people like George Downing, who acted as a sort of diplomat and spy for Cromwell. So there were lots of kind of American associations. There was sort of a lot of crossing across the Atlantic between the sort of the two sides, and a lot of the kind of, particularly those in the parliamentarians who were involved. There's also, of course, actually fighting in America. There's actually argued the last battle of the Civil Wars took place in Maryland. So there was fighting between royalists and parliamentarians out in even in the New World. It was particularly asked about the idea of Cromwell emigrating to America. Now, it's a little bit more delicate, this one, whether or not it's true. Certainly, Cromwell made reference to a colleague in Parliament that if the Grand Remonstrance hadn't been passed in 1641, then at that point he would have probably considered packing his bags and emigrating to the New World. But that's kind of really the only way the reference that we have to that sort of is convincing to Cromwell and wanting to emigrate to America. They make much more of a thing in the film Cromwell, which I have to say I think is probably put in there largely to appeal to an American audience who are watching the film. And from video number 9 onwards, where we talked about Cromwell's ancestry and his early life, quite a few people posted about the fact that they have been doing their family tree and believe that they've got Cromwell as one of their distant relatives. This is actually entirely plausible. There's obviously quite a few members of the Cromwell family, quite a few of his children who in turn had children and so on. And indeed, Cromwell's main descendants, who very kindly lend us objects that we've got on display in the museum today with this wonderful provenance, because they've been passed down the family over the last 370 years or so. Those are descendants, particularly of his son Henry, so the Bush family as they are today. So it's entirely possible either from Cromwell's direct line from some of his children, but also through he had his sisters and who all married and all had children in their own turn. So there is a whole sort of series of potential relationships by which you might be descended from them. If you're interested and do believe that you've kind of got a family relationship, then I do recommend having a look at the genealogy section on the Cromwell Association's website, which has got hints and tips about sort of tracing your family tree and about the Cromwell genealogy on there, which you might find very useful. We had a question then on video number 11. Alex Anna asked about Cromwell's sword, the video we did then, and the fact that on the hilt of the sword there is what appears to be a thumb ring. And Alex asked the question, is this very unusual? Well, yes, it is, particularly for a kind of cavalry mortuary sword like the one that we've got. Usually you just tend to have the sort of plain basket. On the inside, there's no particular further decoration on the inside. There doesn't seem to be a thumb ring in most examples of this sort of heavy cavalry sword. So Cromwell's sword here is quite unusual. And Alex asked about whether or not it would sort of, does actually help with the grip of the sword. Obviously, I've never used it in battle, and anybody who has is sort of not around to kind of comment on it, I'm afraid. But what I can say is, from having handled it myself, is that the thumb ring does add to sort of a sense of security and a sense of balance with the sword, and also, presumably being able to sort of move it in sort of whatever direction you want it to. So yes, I can see that it would be an advantage having it there. Sando asked on video number 14, the Battle of Huntingdon video, asked two particular questions. First of all, have we thought of doing a video on conspiracy theories about Cromwell, particularly relating to him that he founded the Masons, okay, the Masonic order? No, haven't done so far. Have come across that conspiracy theory before. I don't think there's very much truth in it, but we'll look into it, and who knows, maybe that's a fun one we'll do in the future. And he's also asked about whether or not we want to do a video on Cromwell and Ireland. So we had a couple of inquiries about this, and people asking about, particularly things like Tom Riley's theories on Cromwell and Ireland. Yes, we will be doing a video on Cromwell and Ireland. We've been putting it off for a little while simply because of lockdown, and we're hoping to have a very well-respected historian to come and do a discussion on this particular very controversial and vexed and complicated subject. So obviously, given the fact that it's such a controversial one, we want to get this one right. And so bear with us a little while. There will be one on Cromwell and Ireland, in fact, probably more than one. In terms of the episode, which I think was episode 15, talking about books, lots of people posting on there their favourite books, which is great to see. Somebody asked what my favourite one was. I have to say mine, which wasn't mentioned in the video, is Rosemary Sutcliffe's novel, The Rider of the White Horse, which is focused around Fairfax in the early period of the Civil War. Many people will be familiar with Rosemary Sutcliffe as a novelist because she primarily wrote children's books, historical novels for kids, the most famous of which, of course, is The Eagle of the Ninth, set in the Roman period. But she did write a couple of adult novels, one of which is The Rider of the White Horse, and I personally just love that particular story and the portrayal of the characters in it, so that's my favourite. Vanilla Henderson posted and said, we were a bit unfair on Jane Lane, saying that she was, so what if she was a bit partisan? She opened her eyes to many people to this particular period of history. That's entirely fair comment. Obviously, I know sort of we were a little bit down on Jane in the video because obviously, as I say, some of her views might be considered to be a bit old-fashioned or a bit partisan. But yeah, absolutely, she was a hugely popular novelist and got a huge amount of people into this period, and for that she has to be commended. Lots of people also posting that they're hopefully going to visit the museum, which is great. So please take the opportunity to do so. That's one of the reasons we do these videos, is hopefully to encourage you to visit and come and see us once things have calmed down a little bit. Finally, the most recent video we did, number 16, Jason published on the Clubmen video, Very appropriate with this one. He sort of said, you know, he could see the comparison between the clubmen in the Civil War and the group known as the Brotherhood Without Banners in Game of Thrones. Well, as we know, George R. R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones novels and on which the television series is based, nicked lots of ideas from British and European history. You know, you can see Hadrian's Wall being the wall, and but much of the sort of politics of the period coming from the Wars of the Roses. Whether he plundered anything particularly from the civil wars, I don't know. Certainly, you can see comparisons with sort of a group of people who set themselves up as an armed neutral body to try and repel all these armies who are causing chaos in the landscape. And if that's the Brotherhood Without Banners, and certainly is also the Clubmen as well. So who knows? I hope you found that interesting. Please do continue to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you've got any questions or comments, do feel free to post them below, and we'll try and pick them up again in future videos like this one. Please do remember also to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You'll find the details in the contact card at the end of this video, along with also details on how you can donate to the museum. Remember, we are an independent charity and we rely on the generosity and support of our visitors in order for the museum to continue. Otherwise, please stay safe in these very strange and distracted times, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Our next video, we'll be talking about the very vexed issue of Cromwell and Christmas. We'll see you soon.